The one ingredient every memorable story and documentary film has is this: change. And yet very few people understand it. Most filmmakers are completely missing what change, character arc, or character development really mean, and how to leverage it to tell better stories. In this video, I'm going to go over why change is so important in story, what most people misunderstand about it, and then how to determine your protagonist's possible character transformation. And stick around for the end, where I will share 5 of the most common kinds of character change to help you map the trajectory of your current project onto some of the most popular story tropes in history. Hey everyone, if you're new here, my name is Austin Meyer. I'm a documentary filmmaker, National Geographic Explorer, and on this channel I share the field-tested skills, mindsets, and lessons that have helped me on my journey as a documentary filmmaker. In all stories, whether it's a documentary, a rom-com, or a horror film, the seeking of change and the preventing of change are what the story is about. It's about an individual who deeply desires something and who has to get off their ass in order to achieve it. They have to strive, they have to work. And the story is not about whether they eventually get what they desire. The story is about how the ups and downs of pursuing that goal have changed who that character is on a deeper internal level. It's about their new set of beliefs, their new definition of self, and how that results in a new set of behaviors that become the character's norm. No matter what form the story takes, this change is what gives the audience the deepest sense of satisfaction, even when the character change is negative. And we're not just talking about how a protagonist changes. In many of the best films, every single character changes over the course of the story, except the bad guy or bad girl. That is because in stories, the measuring stick that tells us who succeeds and who fails is the ability to change. Good guys accept change and see it as a positive force, whereas bad guys resist change and meet their demise. You may have heard this term in storytelling called arc. The arc in a story is a character's change from beginning through the middle and to the end. In many of the best stories, not only does this change happen over the course of an entire story, it happens in every scene. Watch for this in your favorite films. Each scene is like a mini movie with its own beginning, middle, and end. And within that mini movie, some sort of emotional change happens in each scene. So why is this important? Well, one, if you want to tell great stories, change has to be on your mind constantly. For me as a documentary filmmaker, I don't usually know what will happen before I start filming, but I can choose stories based on the potential of change. I can choose scenes where people will likely change. I can tailor my interview questions to expose change. For example, back in 2018, I worked on a short documentary in Zambia called The Carpenter. The story was about a man named David Miti, who worked at a children's hospital in the capital city of Lusaka, where he handmade devices for kids with disabilities. He made things like crutches and clubfoot braces. He also happened to be a double amputee and had no legs himself. When I first met Mr. Miti, he shared with me that in a few months' time, he was going to get prosthetic legs. He was going to be able to walk for the first time in over 20 years. This is a perfect example of how I try to choose stories in the documentary space. I knew for a fact that if I started filming Mr. Miti when I met him, that over the course of a few months, he was going to experience a dramatic physical and likely mental change. So I did. And documenting that change in real time was a key reason why that short film ended up being published by The Atlantic, National Geographic, and NBC. So think about this as you're planning your documentary projects. And if you need some guidance about types of change to look out for, stick around for the end of this video when I go over some of the most common versions of transformation. Now, when we're talking about character change, the truth is most filmmakers misunderstand what it's all about. A lot of storytellers out there depict character change through labels, titles, and achievements. Someone goes from rich to poor, loser to winner, from being in the throes of substance addiction to being sober. There are entire documentary series based on the premise of rise and fall. Someone is here and then they end up in this new place. But here's the thing. These are all changes They're just not character changes, or at least they're not the character changes that really matter. True character change involves a changing of basic beliefs, which leads the character to take new moral actions. In other words, a character is defined by how they see themselves and how they see the world. They are his or her beliefs about what make a good life, what they will do to get what they want. In great stories, as a character pursues a goal, the trials and tribulations they faced make them question their deepest beliefs. And true character change is when those deepest beliefs change, as evidenced by them taking a new action that the previous version of themselves would not have taken. Let's make this more specific. In the Oscar-winning documentary Free Solo, Alex Honnold's character change is not that he went from being someone who hadn't soloed El Cap to being someone who had soloed El Cap. His character change culminates in that moment he reaches the top of the mountain, calls his girlfriend, and tells her that he loves her. His previous beliefs about love and relationships being a distraction from performance and individual goals have changed. He has let down his emotional walls, invited love into his life, and come to a realization that love and performance can coexist for a more meaningful life. Which leads me to the other misunderstanding that filmmakers have around character change. The misunderstanding is what I call the light switch character change. A light switch character change in Free Solo would have been if the movie almost solely focused on Alex's climbing objectives, had maybe some peripheral mentions of his emotional and romantic detachment, and then all of a sudden, at the end of the movie, Alex tells his girlfriend he loves her. It's called a light switch because the change is just happens all of a sudden at the end of a movie, seemingly out of nowhere. Character change doesn't happen at the end of the story. It happens at the beginning because based on how you set up a character, how you establish their belief systems and the actions that will prove it, we will then see them being shaped and changed by the entire journey of the story. Because we understood Alex Honnold's background from the beginning of being a kid who started to free solo because he was too nervous to ask other people to be his climbing partner, we see forces acting upon him to change when his girlfriend enters his life. By the time he says that he loves her at the end, it is simply the culmination of a process that has been happening throughout the story, leading him to a new understanding of himself. Now, I know that all of this is tricky when we are talking about the documentary filmmaking process because we don't know exactly what will happen, but this is all extremely important to develop an understanding of because it will guide how you choose stories, how you choose characters, the scenes to show up for, and how you craft your edit. For example, understanding all of this will make it more likely that you will try to illustrate or ask your character about their core beliefs, and then you will document behaviors that prove those beliefs. From there, you can see how they change over time. Here's another way to determine your protagonist's character transformation. For this, let me introduce you to a basic equation I learned from a book called The Anatomy of Story. It goes W times A equals C. In this equation, W stands for weaknesses, both psychological and moral. A represents the struggle to accomplish the basic action in the middle of the story. And C stands for the changed person. In most stories, a character with weaknesses struggles to achieve something and ends up changed as a result. The simple logic of a story works like this. How does the act of struggling to do the basic action, or A, lead the character to change from W to C? A character with certain weaknesses, when put through struggle, is forged into a changed being. Back to our Free Solo example with Alex Honnold, I would chart the equation as W, being an emotionally distant man who cannot yet free solo his dream wall of El Cap. A, 2 years of training on that wall while simultaneously inviting a serious relationship into his life for the first time. And C, he becomes someone who believes that love and emotional connection can coexist with individual dreams and performance. When you're working as a documentarian, one of the exercises that can be helpful is to chart out this equation at the beginning of your filmmaking process and write out a bunch of theories. Based on what you currently know about your film and character, what might be true? What might their weaknesses be? What actions will take place that could put pressure on those weaknesses? And what change could that possibly lead to? Brainstorming these will make you more attuned to them, and when they arise spontaneously in front of you, you will be aware that those are the moments you need to capture. All right, and before we wrap up our conversation on change today, let me run you through 5 of the most common forms of change that you may encounter in your documentary films. The first is coming of age. Coming of age stories are extremely common, and the character change in these stories has nothing to do with a child physically becoming an adult. The change isn't that they moved out of their house, or as many movies portray it, that they had their first sexual experience. A true coming of age story shows a young person changing basic beliefs and then taking new moral actions. An example of this is one of my all-time favorite movies, Good Will Hunting. Now, the second that you might commonly find is adult to leader. In this, a character goes from focusing only on finding the right path for themselves to realizing that they must help others find the right path as well. An example of that, Saving Private Ryan. The third change we got is cynic to participant. Here, the character begins as someone who sees value only in themselves. They pull away from society and just want to focus on personal pleasure, freedom, and money. But by the end of the story, the hero has learned the value of making the larger world right and has rejoined society as a leader. An example of this would be the Han Solo character transformation in Star Wars. The fourth change is leader to tyrant, which is a juicy one because it's actually a negative change. In these stories, the character moves from helping a few others find the right path to forcing others to follow their path. And a classic example of this one is in The Godfather. And number 5, leader to visionary. This is not really one you will encounter in the documentary ecosystem all that often, but considering it is the framework for some of the most famous stories ever, I wanted to mention it. In this change, a character goes from helping a few others find the right path to seeing how an entire society should change and live in the future. We see this in many religious stories and creation myths. We also see a version of it in documentaries of cult leaders. Those usually have a little bit of this and a little bit of leader to tyrant, which I gotta say is an interesting parallel. All right, as we wrap up this video, I do have one last reflection on change and why I think it's such a beautiful concept to reflect on. This law of change in storytelling really can teach us how to live more fulfilling lives. As I mentioned, in the story world, good guys change and accept it as a positive force, whereas bad guys resist change. The metric of success in the story world is not whether or not the test was aced, whether or not the girl got the guy, whether or not the battle was won. The metric of success is change. And I think it's so important to approach our lives this way. Failures, mistakes, things not going according to plan, those aren't what define us. What defines us is how we choose to accept those events and how we embrace personal change and growth as a result. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments. This video is an example of the storytelling deep dives that I'm hoping to do more of in the future, because I do think that there's a gap out there in the YouTube space when it comes to like digging into those story elements that are really where these projects that we're all working on come to life. So let me know what you thought of this video in the comments. Thanks again so much for being here. I will see you next week. And until then, go out and tell some stories.